It's a worthy and important question. I've had a number of different meetings with the opposition over the course of the months now since I came in February, beginning with a meeting in Rome and subsequently in Istanbul and in Amman, Jordan. And the opposition, one has to remember that as little as a year ago, there was no great clarity to the structure of that opposition or to who they were, and they certainly had had no experience in this kind of an endeavor. Over the course of that year, they have evolved, I would say, significantly. Are they where they need to be? Not completely, but they have changed markedly over the course of the last few months. At our insistence, and when I say our insistence, the insistence of all of their supporters, the so-called London 11, they reached out and expanded significantly their base within Syria. They elected new leadership. They brought in a much broader base of Syrian representation, including women, including minorities, Christians, others. And so they've built up a much more competent leadership
If I could, I've only got a few minutes.
Okay.
I am very aware of all those things. What I'm unaware of is why it is so slow in actually helping them with lethal support. Why has that been so slow?
I think, Senator, we need to have that discussion tomorrow in classified session. We can talk about some components of that. Suffice it to say, I want General Dempsey to speak to this, maybe Secretary Hagel. That is increasing significantly. It has increased in its competency. I think it's made leaps and bounds over the course of the last few months. Secretary Hagel, do you or General, you want to?
I would only add that it was June of this year that the President made the decision to support lethal assistance to the opposition. As you all know, we have been very supportive with hundreds of millions of dollars of non-lethal assistance. The vetting process, as Secretary Kerry noted, has been significant. But I'll ask General Dempsey if he wants to add anything. But we, Department of Defense, have not been directly involved in this. This is, as you know, a covert action. And as Secretary Kerry noted, probably to go into much more detail would require a closed or classified hearing. General Dempsey.
As he's answering that, and if you could be fairly brief, is there anything about the authorization that you're asking that in any way takes away from our stated strategy of empowering the vetted opposition to have the capacity over time to join in with a transition government, as we have stated from the beginning? Is there anything about this authorization that in any way supplements that?
To your question about the opposition, moderate opposition, the path to the resolution of the Syrian conflict is through a developed, capable, moderate opposition, and we know how to do that. Secondly, there's nothing in this resolution that would limit what we're doing now, but we're very focused on the response to the chemical weapons. I think that subsequent to that, we would probably return to have a discussion about what we might do with the moderate opposition in a more overt way.
So I'm very sympathetic to the issue of chemical warfare, and very sympathetic to what this means to U.S. credibility, and I'm very sympathetic to the fact that people are watching in the region and this will have an impact. But I want to say I am not sympathetic regarding the lack of effort that is taking place, in my opinion, on the ground as it relates to the vetted opposition. And I hope the end state that you imagine here is something that, while will be proportional and will be surgical, is something that enhances the strategy that we've already laid in place. And I hope you'll answer that yes or no at this time.
The answer to whether I support additional support for the moderate opposition is yes.
And this authorization will support those activities in addition to responding to the weapons of mass destruction.
I don't know how the resolution will evolve, but I support
that what you're seeking. What is it you're seeking?
I can't answer that, what we're seeking.
The action, if it is authorized, the answer is, as I said in my opening comments, that the consequence of degrading his chemical capacity inevitably will also have downstream impact on his military capacity.
And is this authorization is only about weapons of mass destruction?
That's correct. This authorization is a limited, targeted effort to focus on deterring and degrading the chemical weapons capacity of the Assad regime.
Is it against any other enemies other than the Assad regime?
No, Senator.
Is it to be utilized in any other country except inside Syria?
No, Senator.
I will say that in response to your answer to Senator Menendez, I didn't find that a very appropriate response regarding boots on the ground. And I do want to say that that's an important element to me, and I hope that as we together work through this, we work through something that's much clearer than the answer that you gave. I don't think, while we all feel the actions by the Assad regime are reprehensible, I don't think there are any of us here that are willing to support the possibility of having combat boots on the ground. And I do hope as we move through this, the administration can be very clear in that regard.
Well, let me be very clear now, because I don't want anything coming out of this hearing that leaves any door open to any possibility. So let's shut that door now as tight as we can. All I did was raise a hypothetical question about some possibility, and I'm thinking out loud about how to protect America's interests. But if you want to know whether there's any, the answer is whatever prohibition clarifies it to Congress and the American people, there will not be American boots on the ground with respect to the Civil War.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Broxton.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Corker, thank you so much for holding this hearing on a vote of conscience. And I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be entered into the record. So I'm going to make a brief statement because a lot of people have been asking me, including my own constituents, on how I view this, and then I will ask some questions about the intel, if I can. Mr. Chairman, thank you for showing us those images of children, because even though it's really hard to look at, we have to look at it. Children gasping for air, young bodies lined up in a row should shock the world. And the failure to act, I think, gives license to the Syrian president to use these weapons again. And it sends a terrible signal to other brutal regimes like North Korea. And can I thank you, Secretary Hagel, for bringing up the issue of North Korea in your opening statement, and Secretary Kerry for your bringing it up. I mean, how many of us have been there to the line where we see thousands of our troops standing there just a stone's throw away from North Korea? We need to think about it. Maybe because I'm from California, I tend to look at Asia. But this is very serious. We've seen that danger up close when we go to that line. Now, since I came to the Senate, I voted against the Iraq War, but I did vote for the use of force against Osama bin Laden. I voted to support airstrikes against Serbia, but I vocally opposed the military surge in Afghanistan. So I approach this Syria issue in the same way I approach those, with a very heavy heart and a very independent mind. I've heard some of my colleagues compare President Obama's position on Syria to the decision to invade Iraq in 2003, and I thank Secretary Kerry for discussing this because I believe it's a totally false comparison. And I know it's been mentioned before. You drew that line again. In Iraq, the Bush administration prepared to invade and occupy a country with well over 100,000 troops. In this case, the president's been clear, no ground invasion, no occupation. We'll have that in our resolution. So why should we take any targeted action against Syria? Not only is it important to keep North Korea in mind, but also allowing the continued use of chemical weapons to go unanswered makes it much more likely that we'll see it used again in Syria, and we'll see it used maybe elsewhere, and terrorists could obtain those and use them on America or our allies or our troops. Use them, for example, against Israel and other friends. It makes it more likely, and this is key, that Iran will view us as a paper tiger when it comes to their nuclear program, and that is dangerous not only for us and our friends, but for the world. Now, in 1997, the Senate supported a ban on chemical weapons by a vote of 74 to 26. Shouldn't an overwhelming vote like that mean something? Shouldn't the Senate stand behind its words and actions? And then in 2003, we passed the Syria Accountability Act by a vote of 89 to 4. I wrote that bill with Senator Santorum. We had a huge vote in favor of it. This is what it says. Acquisitions of weapons of mass destruction threaten the security of the Middle East and the national security of the United States. Shouldn't an overwhelming vote like that mean something? Shouldn't the Senate stand behind its words and its actions? So I believe, as Secretary Kerry said, and so I'll reiterate it, that not only has our president drawn a line, a red line, on the use of chemical weapons, and not only has the world done so, but we in the Senate, we did so. Now, I know there's tremendous reluctance to get involved in another military effort, and sometimes the easiest thing to do is to walk away. Well, I believe we cannot close our eyes to this clear violation of long-standing international norms. I believe America's morality, America's reputation, and America's credibility are on the line. I applaud this administration and our president for coming to Congress. I applaud those who asked him to come to Congress. It's the right thing to do. And I will support a targeted effort, but not a blank check, to respond to Syria's unspeakable deeds to gas its own people to death. Now, my question involves the intel here, and I don't know how much you can give us, so I'm going to try to make this pretty broad so you can answer it, and whoever feels most comfortable. A lot of people are fearful because of what happened in Iraq, that there might be some disagreement between the intel agencies, and we have a lot of intelligence agencies, 17 in all over the place. I don't know how many were involved in this, whether it was 4 or 6 or 8. I don't know whether you can disclose that. But my question is, was there any argument about this fact that they agree that there's high confidence that these weapons were used by the Assad regime? Was there any debate? I mean, there was debate. Was there any dissension between the various agencies?
The intelligence community, represented by DNI Clapper, has released a public document, unclassified, available for all to see, in which they make their judgment with high confidence that the facts are as they have set forth. So, you know, I think that speaks for itself.
Well, I'm going to press just a little bit harder here, John, Mr. Secretary, if I can. Out of all the different agencies, because I remember in Iraq, sure, eventually the word came down, everyone agreed, but then we found out there was disagreement. To your knowledge, did they all come to the same conclusion, the various intelligence agencies?
To my knowledge, I have no knowledge of any agency that was a dissenter or anybody who had, you know, an alternative theory. And I do know, I think it's safe to say, that they had a whole team that ran a scenario to try to test their theory to see if there was any possibility they could come up with an alternative view as to who might have done it. And the answer is they could not.
Okay, last question on intel and Russia. I read, and I don't know if this is true or false, but I read in one of the publications today that members of the Russian parliament were going to come here to lobby colleagues here, to tell colleagues here that there is no such intelligence, that there is no proof. I myself met with the Russian ambassador several times on this matter, and I knew right away, long time ago, they were going to do nothing to help us. But what are they clinging to here? How could they make that case?